Gary Trent Jr. made it clear what his goals are for this upcoming season, and I'm going to break down what the Toronto Raptors can expect in terms of a jump for our starting shooting guard going into next year. Additionally, newly hired Raptors 905 coach Eric Corey gave really interesting insights into what the Toronto Raptors value in both prospects and players, and discussed some things that not only get overlooked by the general public, but as well as other NBA teams. So really interesting discussion there, and it looks like there might be a blockbuster trade involving Donovan Mitchell happening tonight, and I'm going to discuss what this means for the Toronto Raptors, because we're not likely getting Mitchell, but we have been in rumors surrounding the Utah Jazz over the past month. So lots of stuff to discuss. Without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest, breaking down the latest Toronto Raptors news. Firstly, I appreciate everyone subscribing to the channel, getting us to 24K subs. Let's keep it going as the news keeps rolling throughout the summer, but I appreciate everyone watching the vids, checking out the vids. You guys are the best. But the first thing we're discussing, the first thing we're talking about is a massive Gary Trent Jr. leap incoming, because obviously Gary Trent Jr. blew most Raptors fans away last year, just given the impact that he not only was able to have on the offensive end, but on the defensive end, right? There was questions this time last year that we were talking about, okay, can Gary provide that defensive impact to stay on the floor for a Nick Nurse team, right? And he came into last year just absolutely pesting, absolutely clamping up the other team's guards. He ended up being top 7 in the league in both steals and deflections. Nick Nurse always had the confidence to throw him on the other team's best guard, even with guys like Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby on the roster. So that was a massive leap for Gary last season. And additionally, I think one thing that gets overlooked from Gary as well is his offensive game is really coming into form. We knew he could shoot the three. We knew he could make those midi pull-ups, but his floater game and his finishes around the rim, he's not by any means a springboardy guard that's going to be throwing down dunks like Vince Carter or DeMar DeRozan, but he does have, especially that floater that he throws in. He's so smooth. His body is so under control. We saw that really develop also last season for his game. So Gary Trent Jr. is making continuous improvements to his game, and he's a guy that I feel like has been overlooked in terms of just being valued by Raptors fans because of all the trade situations, and people don't want to trade Pascal, Scotty. I get it. We have to give up some assets if we're going to get a guy, by the name of Kevin Durant or whoever else has been rumored. But Gary is an elite prospect for this Toronto Raptors team, and he has some serious goals going into next season. This was posted on Scotty Barnes' story, and all defense coming soon. The eyes emoji and stuff. Right, at Gary Trent Jr. And this is something that he's brought up a few times now this offseason. But with Scotty Barnes posting it now, I wanted to show some love to Gary Trent Jr. because I think he's going to be able to take that next step, take that next leap. And if Gary Trent Jr. can, obviously, as I started off this podcast, he's very strong, just deflecting the ball, stealing. He's a hound defensively, but he does occasionally get blown by. He does occasionally take too many risks while guarding the ball. But if he can be sort of getting the tier of a Drew Holiday, I guess you have to put Marcus Smart in that tier now with the level that he got Defensive Player of the Year last year. But that level of guard, just on the defensive end, that can really just clamp up whatever guards on the opposing team, that's going to be an absolutely ferocious player to deal with if you're going up against the Toronto Raptors, because we know what Gary Trent Jr. can do on the offensive end. I'd argue he's certainly better than Marcus Smart on the offensive side of the ball. Drew Holiday is pretty good on both sides, but if Gary can keep that fluidity, keep that three-point shot up, and then get to the level of one of those all-defensive guards, I don't want to get too crazy. I don't want to get the homerisms going, but we could be looking at our star boy as an all-star boy next season. We might have to change this graphic to the all-star boy because if that defense picks up, right, we can expect some big things there. And Gary's only 23, 24 years old, so there's definitely room for some growth, for some leaps. And if Gary can, just watch some more film, get better, not necessarily because the athleticism's there, the intangibles, the hands, right, those are all pretty good. Just really becoming more sound in terms of not gambling as much for different steals and all that stuff. Staying in front, making the right reads, being able to maybe pick up some charges, play more help side defense, right? We're going to be looking at an absolutely elite all-star caliber Gary Trent Jr. if he can become an all-defensive level player. But let me know if that's too crazy to think of. But man, Gary, he's been slept on, he's been disrespected as with the amount of trade packages he's been thrown in. Even by myself, the trade machine, everybody's been whipping it up the past little while, but gotta show some love to Gary Trent Jr. I expect big things from him next season. But that's not the only bit of Raptors news we're discussing, and the next one is a Donovan Mitchell trade reportedly already agreed upon. Now, I usually record these right after work, but I said, okay, apparently Donovan Mitchell deal's going down later tonight, so I'll wait. I'll hold off. I'll wait till this deal happens. But this video is coming out a little bit later than it has over the past, than the vids usually have over the past couple of weeks. But the deal's not gone down yet. But it seems like it's coming from multiple reports. This is the one I screenshotted earlier, but this is coming from Jacob Hatch, essentially saying that he's hearing from a source close to Danny Ainge, the Utah Jazz have, quote, agreed upon a deal to trade Donovan Mitchell, but the deal is not done. In the sense, it's not been like completely finalized, but they've agreed to make that deal happen. Donovan Mitchell also made a tweet saying, God is good, I believe. So that has a lot of people indicating right around all these times where multiple reporters have essentially said the Utah Jazz have agreed to a trade. Nothing seems to be official pen to paper just yet, but by all indications, apparently a Donovan Mitchell trade is incoming tonight. We discussed in previous videos how the Toronto Raptors, there's a bunch of, firstly, I don't think Donovan Mitchell's getting traded. I don't think we're the mystery team that's making a deal for Donovan Mitchell. A report came out yesterday, Danny Ainge is looking for 6 to 7 draft picks. Masai Ujiri's not forcing over that amount of draft capital for a guy that, is certainly good. But we have Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr. We have very capable, and I think up and coming, especially in Gary, and if you consider Scotty Agard, right wings, we don't need to give that many assets up for a Donovan Mitchell. So I don't think we're involved in this, but if the Donovan Mitchell deal sort of happens, this impacts the Raptors in two sort of ways. Firstly, as discussed, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Jordan Clarkson, some people have discussed Mike Conley on Reddit, which I'm not sold on, but especially that Jordan Clarkson as a potential asset to bring back. You throw Kem and maybe a first at the Utah Jazz to maybe bring him in. Those are some role players that I think the Toronto Raptors could really jump on. Now, the Jazz probably aren't going to deal with their fringe players, Patrick Beverley, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, the guys they acquired in Utah. I'm rambling a little bit, but those are also some players we can maybe throw Birch and a pick in to, bolster our bench a little bit more going into next season. But those are some players, the Toronto Raptors, those deals will begin to fall, right? But the Donovan Mitchell domino is the first one that's happening for the Utah Jazz at that point. So that's one way that could certainly impact. And we might have to make a whole video once we figure out what this deal actually is for the Utah Jazz. But the second one, obviously, is Donovan Mitchell is one of those big key pieces on the chessboard that's going around the NBA right now. And, the Raptors are still in talks. They're still in play for Kevin Durant, according to the odds, according to those minor shaky reports that are coming out day by day. So, if Donovan Mitchell deal happens, maybe the rumors for KD picks up. So I was hoping this deal was going to be done, was going to be fleshed out, and we could figure out and discuss in this video. But it hasn't been just happened yet. But keep your eyes peeled. Keep your eyes peeled for a Donovan Mitchell trade that might be coming tonight, likely to the New York Knicks. We'll see what ends up happening. But the next thing we're discussing, the next thing we're talking about in this video is Raptors scouting secrets revealed. Now, the Raptors' new 905 coach, he did an interview, I believe, not with TSN. It's on right. I'll link the interview below. But had some really interesting insights into what the Toronto Raptors value in specific players. Now, obviously, as Raptors fans, we can just see it from the eye test, right? What we like 6'9" long players that can shoot threes, can play defense, yada yada yada. We also like guards that can facilitate, lead a team, right? Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, those types of players. That's clear as to Raptors fans what the Toronto Raptors front office likes. However, Eric ended up discussing sort of what gets overlooked, and he said that offensive abilities, offensive skills, the resources, the information on offensive ability, that's pretty well known, not just by the casual fan, but also by other teams in the NBA. But what separates the scouting from the Toronto Raptors side of things is the sort of analytics, the sort of things that they look for on the defensive end. So for players, so rather than just looking obviously at your counting stats, blocks, steals, defensive efficiency, all that sort of stuff, he's sort of looking at, okay, we know what type of defensive coverages this team is running. And Is he in that coverage? Is he in that position? How well can he sort of execute a sort of scheme that another team might be looking at, right? They're looking at, defensive IQ. They have sort of in-house metrics, sort of analyzing all of that sort of stuff. And apparently there's a robust system that the Raptors especially have just in regards to defense. Obviously, he didn't dive into the specifics in terms of what the Raptors are actually gauging, but there's a lot of in-house stats, and they're particularly looking at how they follow coverages, how they're being aware on defense, and all that sort of stuff. And then basically, he went on to describe the players that end up becoming undervalued by the average NBA fan and by other teams. And the first guy he brought up is a guy that fell deep into the draft this year in Christian Koloko. Those big men that obviously can anchor your defense. And, when players drive in, they're not necessarily getting the shots blocked. They're not blocking every single shot. They'll get one early in the game, as he discussed that the coaching staffs joke about, because he'll get a block early in the game, but then following the first quarter, and we saw this happen in Summer League a few times, right? They'll get a couple blocks early on, but the real value comes from the fact that guards, wings, posts, whoever's driving in are just afraid to shoot over these big men that really anchor the defense, that can shot block shots down there. So that's where the value, the deterrent of, deterring the actual shots rather than just blocking them and really just putting a roadblock into the offense that the other team wants to run. So that's the type of that player that gets undervalued, according to Eric. Firstly, and the second one is players that are very versatile defensively, that can guard, very switchable, can switch ends. And we've seen this all out thrown by the Toronto Raptors now, picking a bunch of 6'9" guys that Nick Nurse can just have his way with defensive schemes, switching everything, switching to zones, people running around all over the court. And he specifically brought up how guys like OG Anunoby, their trade value, obviously there's been a lot of trade talks with OG this summer, aren't necessarily that highly sought after across the league, because those aren't the type of things other teams are looking for. So the Toronto Raptors are looking for that defensive anchor, which hopefully they found in Koloko, and versatile defenders like OG Anunoby. And then everyone's sort of on the same playing field with the offense. It's easy to pick that sort of stuff out. But really interesting interview. I'll link that down below. But the final thing we're discussing, speaking of OG Anunoby, is he's taking some heat from Toronto Raptors fans. Now, this is one that's a soft spot for me. I know OG, Gary, there are two topics in this video, and they're getting thrown out even by trade packages from me for the quest to Kevin Durant. I get it. We don't want to give up Scotty. We don't want to give up Pascal, but we would like Kevin Durant. And OG and Gary have felt the brunt of it. But this, because when you think a player might be traded, when you think he might be moved, at least over the course of a season, you start to detach yourself from him a little bit. I know that's what happens in the back of fans' minds, but OG Anunoby obviously requested for more of a role from Nick Nurse. I broke it down in the previous video. He's not that elated with his sort of 3-and-D role on the offensive end with the squad. He wants a few more touches, and he struggled. He struggled last season scoring in isolations, where I think he was the league's worst, given a certain amount of attempts in terms of isolation scoring percentages, points generated off of isolation. So, Raptors fans are saying, OG, if you're disgruntled, right, just leave. We don't care. We don't worry about you, all that sort of stuff. And, I get the Fred slander on our comments. I don't like that. I don't like, Pascal, especially last season. But, I'm really backing OG here. I got to do this more often when I'm seeing this hate, when I'm seeing these roasts. OG Anunoby is one of, as brought up, right, one of the most valuable, versatile defenders in the entire NBA. Nick Nurse said in this interview, right, that's a skill that is it's almost irreplaceable, right? It's hard to find guys that are at that level of OG Anunoby that can guard the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's very, very difficult to replace as a role player, especially on the contract OG Anunoby has. But on the offensive end, right, I get that people are roasting him for not being able to dribble and all that sort of stuff. But when you pair a guy that can shoot close to 40% from the three-point line, play the defense, regardless of if he wants a bigger role, let him try it. Let him try things out. If it's not going to work out, obviously OG is not going to continuously beat his head off a wall and try to do something stupid. The Raptors are all about developing guys, putting them in spots to grow their games. As Nick Nurse says, his two goals are to win games and make each player on the roster more money, make them up their value on the trade market, on the free agency market, so they get bigger contracts. Nurse, that's a quote he's brought up a few times now in interviews in the past. right? I'm sure Nick Nurse is going to let OG get free reign, and if OG just takes over, if he takes advantage of those opportunities, he'll be fine, he'll be good. But I'm just praising OG Anunoby here. Now I'm rambling. My heart is in. He's my favorite Toronto Raptor at this point. I love him and Scotty. It's neck and neck between those two guys. But OG Anunoby's not requested a trade. He's not asked out. He's not disgruntled with the organization, the fans, or anything like that. He just wants a little bit of a bigger role. And honestly, we can all feel that sometimes, right? We're all looking to improve, shoot for the mountain. You know what I'm saying? So shout out OG Anunoby. I'm giving an OGs to everyone that's roasting my guy. Roasting our guy, OGs. Getting the laser beams thrown at you if you continue the slander, if you continue the hate. But anyways, folks, you guys are the best to make it this far. Check out the Instagram, the TikTok, the Twitter, all that cool stuff. Enough of me rambling. You guys are the best. I'm signing off. Cheers.